and the New Zealand First leader Winston Peters is due to speak to media in Auckland at the same time, which RNZ will be taking live. So stay tuned to Checkpoint to hear a lot more on that story. Oh, Wallace, you have given an internet address to seniors who want to know how to use the internet. So maybe if I can ask one of my producers to, Mary, can you jump onto SeniorNet and get the phone number, and I can give the phone number to our wonderful audience here. On a final note here, an enterprising whitebaiter in Christchurch is facing the wrath of the internet after trying to sell their excess catch for $88 a kilo for fresh fish or $66 for frozen ones. The ad, posted on Facebook's Buy, Sell and Trade Christchurch page, has been bombarded with messages about the fragility of whitebait as a special fish. 4 of the 6 types around the country are under threat of extinction. So my question is, what do you think of this? This is totally legal, but what do you think of trying to sell your excess catch for $88 a kilo of whitebait on Trade Me, Te Wheeler Fuatai?
That's really greedy. And they shouldn't take more than they actually need. And if they have got more than they need, then they should probably give it away to other people that would like to have it. I also didn't realise until I read this story that there's no catch limit on whitebait, which seems crazy. So, yeah, I think that obviously a basic limit like that would help this kind of situation where I assume it was on Facebook Marketplace or something.
Yes, yeah. That's a fair point, Connor. A man of fish, a man of farming, perhaps yourself, those small rural rivers, you'd want whitebait to be kept for future generations?
Oh, absolutely. I think we do need to manage the population of whitebait, and I've got no idea how they do the system now, but the other fishery species, there is a quota management system. Whether that's appropriate for whitebait or not, I simply don't know. But I guess with the, when we go to a restaurant or fish and chips, where the guy who's cooked it hasn't gone and fished it, generally speaking, so he or she's bought it from someone somewhere. So people must be fishing more than they need and then selling it into the restaurant trade or the fish and chip.
It's just the greed aspect, isn't it, Te Wheeler? Take whitebait, of course, but take just enough for you, your immediate family, two fritters.
I think as well, we don't really see it. I suppose you don't think it's something that you would see.
And we're going now live to the press conference with New Zealand First Party leader Winston Peters, who we're expecting to make a statement this evening on the serious fraud investigation into the New Zealand First Foundation and payments that were being investigated by the SFO. That case was looked at by the Electoral Commission, who referred it to the police. The police then bumped on that investigation to the Serious Fraud Office. We have been expecting an announcement on this prior to the election, which was an undertaking that the SFO made early on in its investigation. Mr. Peters hastily has called a press conference, and he is expected to make an announcement in terms of the findings of that investigation. The New Zealand First Foundation, we know, has paid tens of thousands of dollars of expenses and bills for New Zealand First, the party. And a key question here in this investigation is whether New Zealand First, the foundation, is separate to New Zealand First, the party. And there are close ties between some of those involved in the foundation and New Zealand First, the political party, including the former New Zealand First MP, Doug Woollerton, and Brian Henry, who was involved in the foundation and was also at various times acted as a personal lawyer for Winston Peters. Now, the leader of New Zealand First has walked up to the podium. We are expecting him to start his press conference any second now, and we will bring you that live as it happens. Mr. Peters has said all the time that there is separation between the foundation and New Zealand First, the political party. In fact, he said, I look after the political wing of the New Zealand First Party. That's an administrative matter. And, well, he told reporters to ask other people about the foundation. But it seems this evening he is going to be making a statement on that SFO investigation and how the money was collected and spent. We're standing very by to cross to that.
I don't want anybody to miss out here.
It's very kind
It's my middle name. Okay, thanks for coming. Today's decision by the Serious Fraud Office, being announced right now, exonerates the New Zealand First Party of any electoral law breaches. Having fully investigated the allegations, the SFO has cleared the New Zealand First Party, all of its ministers, all sitting members of the New Zealand First Party, all candidates standing for election, and all party employees of any wrongdoing. It's a relief after months of this cloud hanging over the party that we have been fully cleared. Unlike the recent National Party donation scandal, no party member has been implicated or charged by the SFO. Whilst the SFO has confirmed that no New Zealand First Minister, parliamentarian or party member broke any electoral laws, the timing of its decision to lay charges against the Foundation constitutes a James Comey-level error of judgment. It's an appalling intrusion in a period when the people begin to think seriously about the shape of the next government. It's been amply demonstrated that FBI Director Comey's groundless findings impacted on Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign in the US. Allegations were made about me also in 2008, which the SFO, as you all know, found again to be baseless. While we respect its independence, the SFO cannot justify the timing of its decision. It's quite shocking for any who believe in fair elections that the SFO, 1 day away from overseas voting and 4 days from advance voting beginning, would interpose itself into the general election in this poorly conceived fashion. The Foundation is an entirely separate entity from the New Zealand First Party, but that distinction will be lost on some and be deliberately confused, sadly, by others. The way in which this investigation has been conducted raises serious questions about the conduct of the Serious Fraud Office. In my opinion, the SFO has acted unreasonably and without justification, both in the way in which the investigation has been conducted and in public announcements the SFO has chosen to make about the investigation, in breach of the Serious Fraud Office's own written policy of not commenting on investigations until the first appearance of any accused facing charges. As a result, the New Zealand First Party has instructed its lawyers to issue proceedings in the High Court against the Serious Fraud Office, seeking declarations that the Serious Fraud Office has amounted to an abuse of its statutory powers and has been unreasonable. Compounding the SFO's poor judgment are 3 other matters. First, the SFO's still incomplete investigation of foreign money flowing into the National Party. We know that they were provided with significantly more serious information about the pernicious foreign influence campaign that penetrated the National Party. Yet only a portion of those electoral breaches resulted in charges. And the question is, why? Second, if voters needed to hear from the SFO before the election, where are its findings about Labour's mayoral electoral funding in both Christchurch and Auckland? And third, what about the SFO's investigation into donations made to Labour in 2017? How is that fair? And the answer is, it is not. Voters will judge for themselves the fairness of the SFO's actions. Notwithstanding today's exoneration by the SFO, taxpayer-funded and other journalists, those who have spilled litres of ink in trying to destroy New Zealand First, must now confront the truth that not one minister, MP or party member has been anything other than fully exonerated. The point also needs to be repeated to those same journalists attempting to smear me and my party that New Zealand First is completely separate from the Foundation. Neither I nor any other party is allowed to make any further comment on this matter because it is now sub judice. Any questions?
Are you saying this is a witch hunt against not just the Foundation but you yourself?
Well, we've been through months and months and months of all sorts of people being grabbed and interviewed and examined and all sorts of difficulties and time-consuming at that. And at the end, where the party was concerned, there was absolutely nothing. And this has gone on for months.
Have you been interviewed?
I was not interviewed. I was sent a series of questions, which I was pleased to answer, and I said from the very beginning that New Zealand First wished to cooperate with the SFO way back when these allegations were first made.
Will you use this come election time to question the outcome of the election? Is that how strongly you feel about that? Do you think it will have an impact on the election and your fair treatment?
Look, I'm not going to answer those questions today, but I do know very well, because I watched it very carefully, someone in the United States was 32% in front when the campaign started, if you can rely upon polls, of course. And after the Comey attack and others, which were baseless, she had lost. And this is an intervention in the election which has no relationship to the mandate the SFO has.
Have either of the two defendants ever been party members of New Zealand First?
Look, I have to tell you that when someone says and that the matter is sub judice, it's sub judice, and I can't answer those questions. And nor can you by insinuation.
Did you
infer that in a question with respect? So please understand what the law is. I've done my best in a long, long career to abide by the law.
What is the purpose of the New Zealand First Foundation if it's not to benefit the party?
Well, the reality of that is that's not a sub judice question, but we were only ever a discretionary beneficiary of the foundation, which means that were we not to exist, but the policies were to be found somewhere else, then they should be supported. And that is a serious legal distinction.
When you're talking about timing and questioning,
And that was the New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, there, speaking on the announcement this afternoon that the Serious Fraud Office has filed a charge of obtaining by deception against two defendants in the New Zealand First Foundation electoral funding cases. The charges were filed, we now know, on the 23rd of September. The defendants have interim name suppression, so can't be named or identified at this time, but the SFO has stated that neither defendant is a minister, sitting MP or candidate in the upcoming election or a current member of the New Zealand First Party. Winston Peters there saying he's been exonerated by this investigation and that they're actually taking the matter to the High Court. Obviously, this all relates to an investigation conducted by the Serious Fraud Office after the matter was referred to the police by the Electoral Commission in February. The Commission said it believed that the New Zealand First Foundation had received donations which should have been treated as party donations, and then they passed the matter on. Well, joining us now to discuss the latest developments is Otago University law professor Andrew Guidas. Good evening, Andrew. So Winston Peters and New Zealand First, are they utterly in the clear here, as Mr Peters maintains?
They're utterly in the clear in the sense of they haven't been charged with any criminal activity. Now, of course, if the bar for our politicians is, I am not a crook and I am not undergoing any criminal charges, if that's as much as we expect of them, then they've been, exonerated. But I mean, the reality is that the New Zealand First Party set up this foundation as a shadow way of gaining political donations, gaining the money to run the party. And now two of the people involved have been charged with criminal activity because it was clear to anyone who looked at this from the outset that what they were doing was in breach of electoral law, and they've been caught.
Andrew, I suppose we should clear up very early on in this discussion. The other thing that Mr Peters says is that we can't talk about this because it's sub judice.
Well, no, I mean, we can't talk about who is being charged. We can't speculate on that because there's name suppression. But in terms of, discussing the outline of the case, discussing the background facts and so on, I mean, those are all on public record. Sub judice is something that people throw around when they don't want to talk about an issue. It doesn't mean you can't talk about anything to do with the case.
So in terms of the charges that the two individuals are facing, obtaining by deception, I mean, what is at the core of this?
Well, I need to be very careful because if I say too much, it may indicate who the individuals will be. But what it seems the Serious Fraud Office is saying is that the way that the money flowed into that New Zealand First Foundation breaches the Crimes Act and the provision of the Crimes Act that prohibits people from obtaining by deception. And I'm afraid I'm only going to say that much.
Understand. So let me ask another question then. Is this foundation and the way it is set up an unusual arrangement?
Yes. It's completely unprecedented. The New Zealand First Party has tried to draw similarities between its foundation and National Party, which has a foundation as well. But the National Party foundation is run completely in line with electoral law and is simply a way of gaining long-term donations which are then invested. This was a foundation where people would put money into the foundation rather than give it directly to the party. Because it was put into the foundation, it wasn't being declared to the Electoral Commission as the law required, and then the money was being spent on New Zealand First Party activities rather than the party spending its own money. So it was like a shadow parallel funding structure that paid no attention to electoral law, even though it ought to have. And now something's happened as a result.
Mr. Peters, in his press conference there, saying that, he believes that the SFO has acted in an appalling way in the sense that this investigation has been underway in the lead up to the election. In fact, he's comparing himself to Hillary Clinton being investigated by the FBI Director James Comey, and saying that by the time Hillary Clinton was cleared, it was too late for the campaign. Does he have a point about the timing of all of this?
Well, no, the SFO has to do its job. I mean, the SFO's job is to investigate whether crimes have been committed. And then once it's gained all the evidence to make a decision on that, to make an announcement, either someone's been charged or someone isn't. The SFO will have done its job as quickly as it could. It's had to do it all through the COVID crisis. We don't know how much assistance it was given by those who were being investigated, how much they may have tried to resist investigation and so on. And also we have to think of the opposite. I mean, what if the Serious Fraud Office had held off the announcement and then the day after the election or the week after the election announced that these charges were out there? Would the New Zealand public think that that was doing democracy a service? So, it's damned if it does, damned if it doesn't.
Is the New Zealand First Foundation and New Zealand First, the political party, are they two completely distinct entities?
The New Zealand First Foundation only exists because the New Zealand First Party board decided to set it up and to set it running. So it's very hard to say how these two things can be separate when it was the New Zealand First Party that decided it wanted to set this thing up, and then the New Zealand First Party benefited from the New Zealand First Foundation paying all its bills. So I don't care what technical legalities you may throw at it. If it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Because I suppose that's a really significant point, as Winston Peters has himself said in that press conference, that the distinction will be lost on some because he maintains that New Zealand First's, the foundation is completely separate, and that I suppose he's saying that his reputation and the party's reputation is being besmirched when none of them are charged. This is a separate, entirely separate entity.
Well, they probably shouldn't have set it up if they're worried about that. And if they're worried about how it operated and the fact that people have now been charged with how it operated, they probably should have paid a lot more attention about what it was doing. To sort of now go, oh my goodness, I'm shocked that there's, problems with this thing that we set up and we benefited from by it paying our bills, seems very, very convenient. And frankly, I don't buy it.
And again, New Zealand First, the party, has instructed its lawyers to issue proceedings in the High Court against the Serious Fraud Office. I mean, to what end?
Attack is the best form of defence, right? I mean, they have been, charges have been brought by this organisation, and so probably the best way to try to undercut the political impact of that is to try to make out that there's some wrongdoing or nefarious action by this organisation. So by filing the charges, they'll be hoping to change the narrative.
So obviously there are other investigations that are pending, as Mr. Peters has himself raised. Forget the legalities for a minute, Andrew, if you can. Do we need to review our donation system here?
Yes, it's pretty clear we do. I mean, we've had the National Party, one of its MPs, and we have to remember Jamie Lee Ross was a National Party MP when he was allegedly involved in laundering quite significant donations into the National Party. We've now got charges brought against a foundation that's very, very closely connected to the New Zealand First Party. We've got ongoing investigation into Labour Party fundraising, and we've got the mayor of our two largest towns under investigation for how they have raised money. Now, if that doesn't cause us to think that there's a problem or something needs looked at, I'm not quite sure what would make us think that.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Otago University law professor Andrew Guidas. And if you are just joining us, the SFO has announced it has filed charges of obtaining by deception against 2 defendants in the New Zealand First Foundation electoral funding case. Now, they have made the distinction that the people charged, none of them are ministers, sitting MPs or candidates in the upcoming election. None of them are current members of the New Zealand First Party. Those defendants have interim name suppression. And we heard just before from Winston Peters, who held his own press conference. The party has instructed its lawyers to issue proceedings in the High Court against the Serious Fraud Office. They're seeking a declaration that the SFO has abused its statutory powers and has been unreasonable. The Labour Party has unveiled its $1 billion plan for the health sector, with promises to boost mental health support for school-aged children and increase access to emergency dental care. Hundreds of millions would be spent slashing the wait lists for delayed surgeries and boosting drug buying agency Pharmac's budget. Our political reporter Katie Scotcher has the details.
It wouldn't be a health policy announcement if I didn't start by talking a little bit about COVID-19.
The pandemic was front of mind as Labour unveiled its health policy in South Auckland today. Jacinda Ardern and health spokesperson Chris Hipkins showered with praise.
Thank you for all that you've done and that you're going to do for Pacific people.
We're very proud of you. And we're really proud of your company.
COVID-19 was also echoed in Labour's plan. It's promising to pump an extra $200 million into hospitals to help reduce the wait time for treatments delayed because of the pandemic. The drug buying agency Pharmac will receive the same amount in extra funding. Labour also wants to boost mental health support for school-aged children. Its Mana Ake program extended at a cost of $150 million.
It is going to take us 5 years to roll this out because of workforce, but we've got a good model to build on.
The party also plans to invest in up to 20 more mobile dental clinics and more than triple the emergency grant for urgent dental care from $300 to $1,000. The emergency grant wouldn't need to be paid back.
It's an acknowledgement that after roughly 2 decades, we haven't seen an increase in the amount of funding people on severely restricted low incomes are able to access for dental care.
Dental Association President Katie Ayers is thrilled with Labour's promise.
So that $1,000 will allow most individuals to really get out of the situation they're in with their poor oral health in terms of pain and infection.
National's Judith Collins is also a fan.
I think many people would say that that was a good thing to do.
But she says her party won't be picking up the policy. National is instead promising to give children a free toothbrush, toothpaste and information pack each year.
So we thought we'd put the effort into young people and hopefully build up those an understanding of dental health from there.
Labour, if re-elected, will also double the number of funded cochlear implants each year, establish a rheumatic fever register and expand nurse-family partnerships across the country. And, as already indicated, it will establish a Māori health authority and public health agency, as well as slash the number of DHBs, although the finer details, like which ones, are yet to be decided. I tamaki makouro mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scotcher ahau.
It is almost 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. SFO investigation, 2 people have been charged in relation to the New Zealand First Foundation, or on the policy announcements made by Labour and others coming up from National. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Heavy snow has battered the lower South Island, causing dismay for farmers and delight for school children. For the second day of the school holidays, many woke to a winter wonderland, icy roads and a polar blast that left many reaching for their thermals. Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton hit the road to see how those in the Clutha district were faring.
The snow came in waves, bombarding Dunedin streets with thick flakes before settling on rooftops and gardens. Driving south, the sky darkened as squalls of near-horizontal snow battered cars and livestock, only to be replaced by blue sky minutes later. Snow settled on the roadside, nearby hills and on the backs of some sheep, cows and horses. Patches of green grass stood out, lying in the shadow of tall trees. Robert Gervin has been farming sheep in Waiora for 22 years. While lambing is nearly finished for most of his ewes, his hoggets have just started.
When I went out this morning, I thought, oh no, what am I going to see? But the mums are pretty smart and they've found a lot of shelter. And those that have had lambs overnight they're in behind rushes and behind other shelter, so that wasn't too bad. But it's pretty hard to actually see what was going on though, because as I said, they're in shelter, so there could be a few surprises out there later on.
He says it's a balancing act between not disturbing your stock and checking they're safe and warm.
It's not very nice at all, because at this time of year you want the weather to be getting better, you want to be growing grass, you don't want cold weather. You want these stock to be enjoying themselves a lot, so it's not very nice at all. It disrupts what you're doing.
But Robert Gervin says not everyone in his family was disappointed to see snow.
So our kids were out this morning, they were having a snowball fight, and I've got a 12-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, so the 12-year-old boy, he's got a much better throwing arm than the 8-year-old girl, so they went up and saw the pet lambs and had a snowball fight with them, and were throwing snow at the pet lambs from last year, that is. So yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had if you're a young person and you still enjoy snow and your hands aren't too cold.
Waihola resident Kathy has been living in the lakeside town for the past 16 months.
This is the first time apparently in 6 years, so it's actually settled and it's awesome. Awesome for the kids in school holidays. They'll be having a bowl. Yeah, they've been sledding down the hills.
Further down the road in Milton, a snowman stood proudly in the centre of a white Taylor park, a carrot for its nose, black rock buttons and tree branch arms. But a strong gust of wind later and its head was sent toppling, landing with a wet thud. At a Milton petrol station, Stuart Calder and Matthew Seymour pulled up on their motorbikes after a hard morning riding through 8 inches of snow along the back roads from Dunedin. They're doing a 5,000 kilometre ride around the South Island, starting from Nelson, Tasman, and finding as much gravel road along the way as they can. Stuart Calder says they were sitting in a Dunedin coffee shop this morning, considering whether to hit the road.
A couple of flurries which came through, and it was then perfectly sunny in between, and we thought, oh well, it's sunny now, so we may as well go. And of course we'd only gone about 5 kilometres and we hit the first flurry again, and the sky goes black, and the road got progressively worse and then turned to gravel, and the snow got thicker and thicker, and there was nobody had done anything, of course nothing could be cleared up there, and we haven't seen, I think we've seen 2 cars all morning up there.
Matthew Seymour says the coastal road via Taieri Mouth could get a bit hairy when blizzard-like conditions took hold.
We both dropped our bikes because it was slippery uphill, and the bikes have got electronic stuff that stops you skidding, but it also makes you fall over.
So we've fallen over a few times, but then we pick them up and panic a bit and carry on. Yeah.
But he had something special up his sleeve to keep the cold away.
I've got a base layer of merino, and then I've got an overlayer of electric underwear which plugs into the bike's dashboard, and it has a little control panel where I can select the desired temperature. So I was at about 26 degrees as we rode through -1, and it connects to my gloves, so it's very old manny, but I love it.
Otago Peninsula resident James Vossa was less than delighted when he found out some flights out of Dunedin were cancelled.
It's insane, I've never seen it like this before. Like, the sheep and alpacas are just loving it, but myself and the wife are not loving it so much. She's supposed to fly to Christchurch right now, so she's getting a bus instead.
Paul Lecomte has been living on the peninsula for 20 years.
Winter we see him a lot. We probably get this 5 or 6 times a winter, but not in spring. Timing has made this one fun, that's for sure.
He and his family wanted to make the most of the rare day.
Oh, they're loving it, school holidays and all. I'm doing the recce to come up here to see if it was worth getting the toboggan out, and apparently it is, so we're going to go and get the toboggan out, and the boys are going to have some fun in a minute.
Right, kids take full advantage of the snow on school holidays.
Exactly.
Don't need to go to Queenstown.
No, save the petrol, eh?
Most of the severe weather warnings and watches have ended, with warmer conditions expected over the coming days. In Milton for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
And if you were listening to Tessa's piece on radio, there's some absolutely beautiful photographs in that. We'll put it up on our Facebook page so you can look back at it. While relief is near for Aucklanders with a permanent fix for the Harbour Bridge due to come ahead of schedule. The transport agency Waka Kotahi says all going to plan, the new 22.7 metre strut will be installed overnight this Saturday, the 3rd of October. Strong gusts saw the bridge closed to commuters for about an hour this morning before 3 lanes reopened in each direction. And there were fears wild weather could force further closures tonight, with the transport agency Waka Kotahi monitoring wind speeds minute by minute to ensure it's still safe to drive across. Well, joining us now with the latest is Brett Glidden from Waka Kotahi. Good evening, Brett. How's it looking out there on the bridge?
Yeah, well, the bridge is still open, so that's a positive. And the high winds haven't returned yet, so we're hopeful that we're through the worst of it and looking better for the rest of the week.
Obviously, this morning, different story. You had to close up shop for a bit. I mean, there were a lot of people sitting there at the base of the bridge waiting for it to reopen. Was there no avoiding that, no forewarning?
Yeah, a really tough decision. We put out some warnings yesterday to say this could happen, and look, we had to make a call this morning. We had wind gusts of 98 kilometres an hour, and while we have the bridge in this compromised state with a one damaged strut, we are just not prepared to take any risks of any potential incidents up there or further damage, which could mean that the bridge was out for a much longer period. So we're playing it slightly conservative, although there were still 98 kilometre hour gusts up there, so it was pretty windy. So we made the call to shut the bridge this morning, and unfortunately that did have a huge impact on commuters. But longer term, we're hoping that we can get the permanent solution back in quicker and get the bridge back to its original state.
OK, we'll get to the permanent fix in a second, but can you just clarify for us? So with the fear around the high winds, is that because the temporary strut is not up to that added pressure, or is it because you are worried that vehicles might be battered around up there and hit the strut and it wouldn't be up to that?
Yeah, it's not so much necessarily that strut. So what we're concerned about is another high-sided vehicle up on the bridge that fell over and damaged either that strut or another part of the bridge, which would put us back further to getting a permanent solution. So while we've got the bridge in a compromised state, it's not carrying its full load capacity. We don't want any further damage to the bridge, which would mean we had further restrictions for a longer period of time. We want to get the bridge back to its original state, and then we can operate it like we normally do. So that's the concern. While it's compromised, we don't want to take any risks of further damage, which delays a permanent fix.
So I'm assuming then it's high-sided vehicles, heavy vehicles, which would be the biggest risk. So why not tell them they're not allowed on the bridge at the moment?
Yeah, look, absolutely, it's high-sided vehicles. Unfortunately, you can't separate them. So there's no way in operating the bridge that you can completely ban high-sided vehicles. It's too hard to get them out of the traffic flow. So the unfortunate part of that is that we do have to ban, we had to close the bridge completely to all vehicles. Obviously, motorcycles also struggle in high winds, and high-sided double-decker buses which travel over the bridge. So it's more than just high-sided trucks.
Yeah, OK. So good news is that this, replacement strut is going to be ready ahead of time. What is the situation there?
Yeah, look, we're working really hard, and we're hopeful that it will be ready for installation on Saturday night. So we're putting that out now because we know that that's going to have an impact for people on Saturday night. So want people to start planning ahead now, because it will mean if we've got the strut ready and it's in manufacture at the moment, and we complete all the tests and reviews that we've got to do for the rest of this week, we're hoping we'll be able to close the bridge southbound on Saturday night for an extended period to install the strut. That will not mean that the bridge is back to its full capacity. We still have to tension that strut, and unfortunately we'll have to do that a following night or later on. We can't do all that in one night. That's because we haven't completed all the design checks on the tensioning of it, and also that
so
requires
Brett,
some further planning.
For those of us who are less technically minded, when you say you have to tension it, what do you mean?
Yeah, so when we put it in and it just sits there, it's actually not doing anything. So at the moment, that temporary strut up there is just sitting there. And when we put the new one in at the weekend, it will just be sitting there. It doesn't take any load, so it's not carrying any weight of the bridge. What we have to do is we have to put tension into it. So stretch it and then bolt it in so it's actually got tension in it, which allows load to go through it. And when it's got that load of the bridge going through it, that's when we can operate the bridge back to its original state. So it's a two-stage process.
So this thing is whopper, right? It's 22.7 metres. Does it come in one monster chunk or...
Yeah, correct. So it's got a joint in the middle, but it will be installed as one. It weighs about 5 tonne, and it's a pretty big piece of kit. It's currently being fabricated in Whangarei and will come down from Whangarei hopefully on Friday, so that we'll have it ready to go for Saturday.
So when you also say you have to do these calculations and tests and run your numbers, what exactly are you doing with that? What are you checking and calculating and adding up and subtracting?
Yeah, so there's two things we're doing there. One is for the replacement, we're doing calcs to make sure that the replacement piece operates exactly like the original piece. So we want the bridge to go back to its original state. So we've got to make sure the new piece, all the new materials mean that it operates in the exact same way as the old bit. The second bit is when we put this tension into it, we have to get big jacks and basically push and move the bridge to put tension back into it. And when we do that, we've got to do some calculations to make sure that we get the load distributed all in the right places again, and we don't put too much load in that makes damage on another part of the bridge. So it's really important that we get those calculations right so that when we load it up, that it does return to its original state and we don't cause problems anywhere else.
Rough numbers, how many big brains have you got working on this?
Yeah, we've got a lot. So we've got our consultants working on it, flat out on the design. We've got independent reviewers in the United Kingdom doing independent reviews to make sure the numbers are all correct. We've got our fabricator working 24/7 building it. We've got our constructors working out the methodology about how they're going to install it and put that tension back into it. And then we've got our traffic operations people thinking about how we manage the traffic and continuing to manage the traffic. So, yeah, we've got a lot of people, probably over 100 people that are doing different parts and planning for this installation.
So installation on Saturday overnight, that goes ahead if the weather is good, but if it turns to custard, when will you call it and let people know?
Look, we'll probably know on Friday what the weather's looking like, if not early Saturday morning. So we'll try and let people know as soon as possible. Otherwise, we wanted to get the message out now that expect southbound to be closed. So if you're going into the city on Saturday night, don't be prepared not to use the Harbour Bridge. You'll have to use the Western Ring Route or public transport.
Before you go, Brett, this is a question we're getting around the office and I'm hoping you'll be able to answer it. Which is the safest, most sheltered lane on the bridge?
It depends which way the wind's blowing, but when the bridge is back up and running, they're all safe, so it does operate fine no matter what lane you're in, but we've just got to get it back to that permanent place and it will be fine for everyone to go in any lane they want again.
Good to know. Thanks for your time, Brett. That's Brett Glidden, who's from Waka Kotahi, talking there about the permanent repairs to the bridge, hopefully happening overnight on Saturday. If you're just joining us, 2 people are facing charges after a serious fraud office investigation into the New Zealand First Foundation. The pair have been charged with obtaining by deception. At a press conference a short time ago, New Zealand First leader Winston Peters said all MPs and ministers, candidates and party employees were cleared of wrongdoing. But coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, a broken deal. The All Blacks again cry foul over the prospect of spending Christmas in quarantine. And Labour cast doubts over the COVID-free status of some of the Pacific Islands. US President Donald Trump and Joe Biden prepared a face-off in the first presidential debate tomorrow. And of course, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you could always send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now to get to the headlines with Susanna.
The New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters has instructed his lawyers to take action against the Serious Fraud Office for its investigation into his party. The SFO has charged 2 people with obtaining by deception following its investigation into the New Zealand First Foundation. But it says they are not a minister, sitting MP or candidate in the upcoming election or a current member of the New Zealand First Party. Winston Peters says it's a relief that the SFO has exonerated his party of any electoral law breaches. More than 1 million people have now died from contracting COVID-19. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guidas is calling it a mind-numbing figure and an agonising milestone. A man who escaped managed isolation yesterday walked around Auckland for 8 hours before returning to his hotel room. It's believed the man broke the security latch on his window and tied sheets together to escape his fourth-floor room. The Greens co-leader James Shaw says his party's $13 billion transport plan will make a massive difference to emissions and to how New Zealanders travel. He says the plan, which includes free public transport for under 18s and over 65s, is easily absorbable within the COVID recovery program. A permanent fix for Auckland's Harbour Bridge is due to come ahead of schedule. The temporary repair to the bridge will likely be replaced with a permanent strut this weekend. Brett Glidden from Wakakotahi told Checkpoint they're hopeful it will be installed overnight on Saturday. Meanwhile, traffic is flowing across the Harbour Bridge as strong winds, which were expected in Auckland this afternoon, have dropped off. Farmers in the lower South Island are facing challenges during lambing due to the heavy snow and bitingly cold temperatures. Snow has fallen to sea level, with heavier flurries settling on higher ground. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Air New Zealand says it's drawn about $110 million from the government standby loan aimed at helping it through the pandemic. The company held its annual meeting today where it told shareholders it has about $1 billion backing but is burning cash at a rate between $65 to $85 million a month. Its chief executive, Greg Foran, says the airline will remain under pressure for some time, but in the near term it would be a smaller, domestic-focused airline.
We can see an Air New Zealand in the future that is smaller for a time, but even more efficient, operating fewer wide-bodied aircraft. The difficult decisions we've made in the past several months, whilst painful, are with a view to making Air New Zealand even more profitable in the future.
Meanwhile, Mr Foran also acknowledged its customer service for those with impacted bookings had fallen short during the pandemic. He says even its most pessimistic Black Swan event planning could not have predicted so much disruption to its operations in such a short period of time.
At times, we did not just stumble, we unfortunately fell. And for that, I sincerely apologise. Having to cancel 4 million seats in the space of a few short weeks saw us implement a credit solution quickly, but not fast enough. We do recognise that there is still some work to be done to enable us to provide a fully self-service digital solution for customers with more complex bookings or for those who've booked via a travel agent. Please be assured that we continue to work on this.
And that's Greg Foran, the Chief Executive of Air New Zealand, speaking at the company's annual meeting today. And let's stick with business because Nicholas Poynton has joined me in the studio. Nicholas, let's start with the seafood company, right? So New Zealand's largest seafood company has come up with an unusual way to minimise waste. What's its idea?
Yeah, I must say I had to read this press release over and over again this morning when it landed on my desk. But the seafood company Sanford, that's one of the biggest in the country, they've taken a step, albeit quite a small one, into the beauty industry. The company has purchased a 50% stake in the health and wellbeing company called Two Islands, which I have been told today is actually quite a popular brand here in New Zealand. And the reason why both companies have agreed to this deal is because they believe it will have mutual benefits. Sanford has access to and the ability to produce marine collagen from hoki fish, from the skin of hoki fish, which is a key ingredient in Two Islands beauty products.
I'm screwing my face up, but I'm sure it's, it turns into a completely different product at the time of use.
Well, it seems like sea life has lots of benefits for the beauty industry, but the benefits here for Two Islands, well, they stand to gain a lot from this deal. Sanford, it's a big international company. They have a big global distribution network that they hope to tap into. They want to get their products on the ground in more countries, particularly in Australia and also countries throughout the Asian market. It also has a big research and development department, which is really valuable for a company that's always looking to develop new products. And as I mentioned before, it has a steady supply of sustainably sourced marine collagen. And if you do operate in the health and wellness space, which, mind you, is a multi-billion-dollar industry, being able to sell that to your consumers, that the products you're making are sustainably sourced, well, it's really invaluable, really. For Sanford, I guess the main benefit for them is that they're all about maximising or reducing waste by maximising all parts of the fish.
So would they normally toss that bit of skin if it wasn't going into face cream or whatever?
Exactly. So this is in line with their environmental strategy. That look, that part of the fish, they've used it in the past a little bit, but look, they're going to have a market here to continually supply this marine collagen, which they derive from the skin of a hoki. And the other, I guess, real benefit for them is that it's actually quite a low-risk investment. You know, we don't really know how much they paid to obtain half of this company. They wouldn't tell us. But, you know, to give us a bit of a heads up, a bit of a gauge on this, 2 islands, it only employs about 3 people. They have about 12,000 shares. When this announcement was made, it wasn't actually made on the NZX, which suggests that it was probably a relatively small deal. On the back of this, Sanford's share price hasn't really moved too much. But look, it's a really interesting investment altogether, and we'll see if this is a match made in heaven in the future.
Very interesting. Can't wait to see what it smells like. Okay, you've got a report from the ANZ, and it's kind of suggesting that enthusiasm for the housing market could take a bit of a dip over the summer months.
Well, look, we've seen throughout the pandemic that in the economy that house prices, they have been the real bright spot. They've sort of defied all belief as they've continued to grow amid so much uncertainty. It's not really too surprising given that there's been a lot of fiscal and monetary stimulus in the form of, you know, the official cash rate being cut. We've seen the introduction of wage subsidies, the mortgage deferral scheme. But ANZ, they put out this little property insights report this afternoon, and they believe, they're taking a bit of a dimmer view of the housing market's outlook. They believe that with this heat we're seeing in the market, they expect it to cool in about 6 months' time. We'll start to see signs of that. Mainly, the main reason why they point to this is that a lot of those subsidy schemes or the fiscal support taken by the government, as those begin to roll off, incomes will start to be strained. The other is the fact that migration, which has typically been a really strong contributor to the strength that we've seen in the housing market, doesn't exist. But that's a lagging indicator. They expect that will start to have an effect on house prices in about 3 to 6 months' time. So, look, they say that we could expect to see a bit of a wobble in the housing market come then.
Okay, let's talk markets, front of house, and what's going on behind the scenes too.
Yeah, so look, before we get to the market numbers, it's probably worth mentioning that the NZX, its Chief Information Officer, David Godfrey, has announced that he's resigning at the end of the year. We don't really know why he's resigning. No reason was given. It's quite easy to speculate that it may be linked to all those hacks we heard that the NZX suffered.
The cyber attacks, yeah.
The cyber attacks.
Is he the boss in charge of IT, is he?
Yes, so he's had many roles in the IT department, and he was leading the company's full technology function as head of IT in June, and has done so since February 2016. No real reason was given. The comment I have here, I've got a statement here from the NZX. Its Chief Executive Mark Peterson talks about the fact that the NZX has maturely changed, its digital systems have changed, but look, they say that we wish David all the best for his future.
And the numbers from today?
Well, the NZX Top 50, it is down about 0.5% or 60 points to 11,742. Our own dollar is up to 65.6 US cents, 92.6 Australian, 51.0 British pence, and gold is up a touch to 1,881 US dollars an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. That's Nicholas Poynton with Business. The All Blacks standoff with SANZAAR continues, with coach Ian Foster accusing them of reneging on a rugby championship deal that would have had his team home in time for Christmas. He's hoping a solution can be found that means they won't be in quarantine over the festive season, but isn't ruling anything out. Nick Trubridge reports.
The All Blacks are once again crying foul over the prospect of spending Christmas in quarantine. Today, coach Ian Foster's claimed a deal for their rugby championship games to be wrapped up in 5 weeks has been broken.
There was a deal, we feel that SANZAAR's reneged on that, so we'll put some solutions and sort of wait and see.
New Zealand Rugby and SANZAAR remain at loggerheads over the 6-week-long schedule for the Rugby Championship in Australia in November and December. At the moment, the All Blacks' last test of the tournament is on December 12th, meaning the players won't get out of quarantine and home in time for Christmas. Ian Foster says ending the tournament a week earlier, on December 5th, is the best solution.
At the end of the day, there was a good solution at the start. 6 tests, 5 weeks. It was achievable. It was achievable with South Africa and Argentina could play 6 in 6 weeks. It fitted a time zone. We've come up with a couple of ideas around that. So you've got to remember these players have been playing since February. They've been training since February. This is not about a Christmas issue. This is about players who have been playing and preparing to play through COVID, through a whole lot of situations for a long, long time. And at some point we've got to draw a line in the sand and say that's enough.
He wouldn't be drawn on whether they'll boycott the final game, though.
Well, I don't want to talk about that now. I mean, that's a headline that I don't want to put out there, but we're bitterly disappointed that what was proposed got changed.
But he didn't totally rule out some of the All Blacks players skipping the tournament altogether.
Oh, look, there's a whole lot of things that could happen, but let's not dwell on that. We think there's a good attitude to fix this up, and it needs fixing.
The All Blacks are currently in Hamilton preparing for the first Bledisloe Cup match against Australia in Wellington next week. Meanwhile, the Wallabies have had their first training session at Christchurch's Linwood Rugby Club this afternoon. And while there may be tension between the rugby unions, at least some in the two teams are friendly. Former Crusader and Wallabies forward Peter Samu revealed he got a special delivery from his old Crusader teammate and All Black Richie Mo'unga while in quarantine.
Yeah, I've been messaging a few of the boys. I actually had Richie Mo'unga drop some food and some toiletries off to me early in the week, on Sunday actually, before you had to head into camp. So it was a bit of a tease. I wasn't able to go outside and see him, so can hopefully catch up soon.
Peter Samu says the team has been spending time off the field planning how to take on the All Blacks, but today they were able to head out for a first run around. He says he's not worried by the cold snap hitting New Zealand. He's seen it all before in Christchurch playing for the Crusaders. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Labor appears to have doubts about the COVID-free status of some of the island nations. As a result, it's unwilling to relax bans on summer harvest workers from those countries, despite being urged to by growers and the National Party. Eric Frickberg reports.
Fruit left to rot on trees. That's what fruit growers and other summer produce harvesters fear will happen if they don't get enough workers to pick their crops this summer. COVID-19 restrictions are blocking the arrival of workers from the Pacific Islands under the Registered Seasonal Employer or RSE scheme, and not enough New Zealanders can be found to replace them. So last week, Mike Chapman of Horticulture New Zealand proposed a solution.
If we could, from COVID-free countries, get a flow of RSE workers back, that would be the ultimate solution.
In other words, only bring in RSE workers from COVID-free countries. The World Health Organization lists both Solomon Islands and Vanuatu as not having reported cases of COVID, and both nations have traditionally supplied RSE workers for New Zealand. But Labour's agriculture spokesperson Damien O'Connor is concerned about the veracity of their COVID-free status.
None of these little islands are completely free of risk, and we need to ensure that our border policies are robust and that we don't allow COVID to come into the country with RSE workers or anyone else.
Damien O'Connor went on to suggest that some island states might not always keep good official records about what diseases they actually have.
We are not over the border controls that they have in each of these countries. Many are not as robust as New Zealand, so we're mindful that, there may be COVID in some of these countries. And as we know, every week the situation with COVID changes and the risk profile does as well.
Horticulture New Zealand declined to be interviewed on this, saying its earlier position was unchanged. But the National Party's agriculture spokesperson David Bennett says Damien O'Connor's worries could be answered by taking extra precautions.
There's two tiers to it. It's got to be a COVID-free country and a country with a good history in that regard. And then secondly, there's going to be the requirements around the entry and testing and contact tracing and such like. That way we'll be endeavouring to cover all bases as much as we can.
Richard Clarkson is president of the Motueka Fruit Growers Association. He says his members will definitely provide quarantine to give confidence to any essential workers they can get.
We've got space and we've got facilities to be able to quarantine them on site. It's the ability to get them into the country is our biggest issue to start with, but we can actually put things in place to make sure that we can guarantee their quarantine and their safety. We don't want to put our RSE workers at risk because they are a lifeline to the industry, really.
Richard Clarkson says horticulture kept going throughout the first lockdown and it could do so again as long as it has enough workers. For Checkpoint, call Eric Frickberg 10A.
It's almost 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. The SFO investigation into the New Zealand First Foundation, any of the new policies announced on the campaign trail, and a lot of you already getting in touch about the All Blacks spending Christmas in quarantine. That fight is not over yet. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Rival euthanasia groups are trying new tactics to convince New Zealanders on how to vote ahead of the upcoming referendum. As Kiwis prepare for the October 17 vote on whether competent terminally ill patients can request a lethal injection or take a lethal dose, there's debate about how much people really know about what they're voting on. Alex Perrottet dives into some of the contentious questions.
The euthanasia debate is really starting to heat up as election day looms. Last month, orange and purple billboards sprung up around the country, urging Kiwis to inform themselves on the End of Life Choice Act. Vote Safe against euthanasia is concerned that many don't know what the ready-to-go law is allowing. Vote Safe launched an online quiz asking people what they thought the law allowed, and says half of the almost 130,000 respondents think it's about turning off life support. That's something that's already in common practice. VoteSafe's campaign manager Enoch Kloosterboer says that's a real worry.
There's a lot of confusion out there from people thinking that it's around legal options which already exist, such as turning off life support, do not resuscitate orders, the ability to refuse treatment and palliative medication that may hasten death. But we're not actually voting on that. We're voting on the End of Life Choice Act.
His quiz has a bunch of other questions that have raised the ire of the law's proponent, David Seymour, and other groups in support. They say there's misinformation. Catherine Marks, who was the lawyer for euthanasia campaigner Lucretia Seals and helped draft this law, says it's deceiving and fear-mongering.
The concern was that there is actually quite a lot of false information being put out that is creating sort of fear and concern around the Act that isn't actually factually correct in terms of what's in the Act.
Catherine Marks is part of a group called Yes for Compassion, which has recently launched a rival website, and it has a striking similarity to Vote Safe. It's called Vote Smart, and also features orange and purple coloured boxes and seeks to put voters at ease about the law's provisions. The only thing the two rival groups agree on is to stress that voluntary euthanasia, or assisted dying as proponents prefer to call it, has already passed through Parliament and all its provisions are set in stone and published online. The referendum is binding. According to VoteSafe's quiz, 51% of respondents didn't know that, and the average overall score was 4 out of 10.
All the numbers are showing us that Kiwis are really confused about what this is or isn't about, and essentially most Kiwis definitely do need to do more research and be more informed in order to truly use their democratic ability to cast an informed vote.
But is Vote Safe misleading? It says there's no assessment for coercion required and doctors don't have to ask patients if they've been pressured. But the law says once a request is made, the doctor must, quote, do their best to ensure the person exercises their wish free from pressure. So isn't that enough?
Essentially, the doctor is meant to do their best, but from a legal perspective, that's a really low bar to simply do one's best to ensure that a person is free of coercion or pressure or bullying, especially when we know that about 1/10 of our elderly are being the victims of elder abuse in New Zealand, and 4 out of 5 of those that abuse is inflicted by family members.
Catherine Marks says it's watertight and there's no evidence in other jurisdictions that people have been coerced.
If they have any concerns at any stage, they have to completely stop the process. It's over. It can't just pause. And so these are also requirements that if they breach them, they could be prosecuted and face imprisonment even. So they're very serious. So the doctors are going to be quite rigorous when they do this.
Only 35% of respondents were correct in guessing that the shortest possible turnaround from requesting euthanasia to obtaining the lethal dose or injection is only 4 days. Enoch Kloosterboer says overseas laws have cooling off periods, while New Zealand's doesn't.
But overseas we see things like Canada, which requires a 10-day waiting period, Hawaii, which requires a 20-day waiting period. Even Victoria next door requires a 9-day waiting period.
But Catherine Marks says the Ministry of Justice and Health report that 4 working days may be unlikely in practice.
If you were in hospital, the minimum could be 4 working days, but they say that it's likely to take much, much longer than that. And then what they do say is that if you're in hospital, you're probably very, very close to death in that situation. And that if you are in a residential setting, the minimum time it could be would be 15 working days. So that's 3 weeks, and it would probably take weeks or months.
Enoch Kloosterboer defends his VoteSafe site and his billboards and is encouraging people to go online and read the law. He says he has real concerns and fear-mongering has nothing to do with it. Catherine Marks and Vote Smart say it's a safe, workable law which affects no one except the person requesting to use it. The End of Life Choice Act with all its provisions can be found at legislation.govt.nz. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And in breaking news now, 3 German yachties who were refused entry to this country after arriving in the Bay of Islands have been jailed until they board a flight home on Thursday. Now, these are the 3 yachties that arrived on the Anita yacht in Opua over the weekend, and they had been declined an exemption under COVID rules to cross our maritime border. They have been in custody since and will remain in custody until they're put on a flight home on Thursday. To the US now, where preparations for the first duel in an already bitter battle for America's top job are underway, with Donald Trump and Joe Biden set to go head-to-head in the first presidential debate tomorrow. New revelations about Mr. Trump's tax evasion could give the former vice president useful ammunition, but the president is an unpredictable opponent. Our Washington correspondent Kate Fisher reports.
Joe Biden has made his strategy clear.
What do you feel like you have to accomplish to be successful on Tuesday? What do you have to do to win the debate?
Just tell the truth.
But some analysts believe Donald Trump will struggle to do the same.
Trump is going to lie. He lies all the time. He lies without shame, without remorse.
Mark Rome, Associate Professor of Government and Public Policy at Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy, says that will make it hard for Joe Biden to score points.
Fact-checking him doesn't do that much, although I think Biden needs to hold him to account. And, if he can find a skillful way to do that, that makes Trump look not only like a liar, but make him look petty, make him look small, then that will be effective. But just fact-checking him, that's not going to have any impact.
Certainly, Joe Biden and his team are taking preparations seriously. He doesn't want to risk his lead in the polls, and his recent debate performances have not been commanding. By contrast, Donald Trump has reportedly done little in the way of formal preparation. But he has said he's being helped by former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and his 2016 presidential primary rival, Chris Christie.
Either one of them is about 5 times smarter than Sleepy Joe, but we had a little debate prep before we came here. I think this whole thing, though, is debate prep. What I do is debate prep every day. I'm taking questions from you people all the time.
But he also evades some of those questions. The most recent, the New York Times revelations about his tax avoidance and huge financial losses.
It's totally fake news, made up, fake. When you're under audit, you just don't release them. And again, they treat me very.
Tell us what you paid in federal tax.
I didn't call him. I'm talking to him. You should be more respectful of this gentleman.
Chris Edelson, Assistant Professor of Government at American University, expects there to be little respect on the debate stage.
People talk about Donald Trump being unpredictable. I think in many ways he's quite predictable. We know what to expect. He's an entertainment president. He's not a real president. He's someone who plays a role of being a president, and he blusters, he yells, he comes up with schoolyard insults for his opponents, he lies. I expect we'll see that. He's not a good debater, but he's a bully. And I think it makes it hard for somebody debating him to know how to respond. For instance, Hillary Clinton, who is in many ways an effective debater, was clearly thrown off. I think she acknowledged that later when Donald Trump sort of lurked around her during one of the debates. If I'm Joe Biden preparing for the debate, I wouldn't approach this as a conventional debate.
It's likely to be unconventional, but also as the first of 3 scheduled debates, it's likely to be the most consequential. Tuesday night in the swing state of Ohio could be critical in determining whether Donald Trump can claw back Joe Biden's consistent lead in the polls. For Checkpoint, I'm Kate Fisher in Washington.
Some quick feedback before the news on the SFO investigation. This listener says Winston is the most self-righteous fantasist in New Zealand political history. You always know with Winston when a raw nerve has been hit because his reflexive response is to call his lawyers and file a lawsuit. In this case against the SFO. What a spectacular loser.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. 3 German yachties who were refused entry to this country after arriving in the Bay of Islands have been jailed until they board a flight home on Thursday. They applied for an exemption after they had already set sail, but this was not granted. 2 people have been charged with obtaining by deception following an investigation into the New Zealand First Foundation, which has been bankrolling the New Zealand First Party. The defendants have interim name suppression, so can't be named or identified. But the New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says all ministers, sitting members, candidates, current members and party employees have been cleared. The party has now instructed its lawyers to take legal action against the SFO, seeking declarations the agency has abused its statutory powers.
The timing of its decisions to lay charges against the Foundation constitutes a James Comey-level error of judgment. It's an appalling intrusion in a period when the people begin to think seriously about the shape of the next government.
Winston Peters says the SFO has been unreasonable and cannot justify the timing of its decision so close to the election. Otago University law professor Andrew Guidas told Checkpoint the party is utterly in the clear in relation to the criminal charges, but it is closely linked to the foundation.
I mean, the reality is that the New Zealand First Party set up this foundation as a shadow way of gaining political donations, gaining the money to run the party. Now, 2 of the people involved have been charged with criminal activity because it was clear to anyone who looked at this from the outset that what they were doing was in breach of electoral law.
Law Professor Andrew Guidas. The man who escaped managed isolation in Auckland yesterday morning walked all over the city for 8 hours before returning to the hotel of his own volition. An investigation suggests he broke the security latch on his window to get out and used sheets tied together to climb down 4 floors. He has tested negative for COVID-19 twice and is not considered high risk. Meanwhile, the number of people worldwide who have died with the virus has passed 1 million, with many countries still experiencing surging numbers of new infections. Our World Watch reporter Pelina Lau has more.
Deaths in the US, Brazil and India make up nearly half that total, and experts warn that the true figure is probably much higher. The UK and France are now experiencing second waves of the virus and are going back into lockdown. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is calling it a mind-numbing figure and an agonising milestone, but he says we must never lose sight of each and every individual life. This is Pelina Lau.
Work on a permanent fix for Auckland's Harbour Bridge could start as early as this weekend. Strong wind gusts closed the bridge to commuters for about an hour today before 3 lanes reopened in each direction. Waka Kotahi Transport Services Manager Brett Glidden told Checkpoint a new 22.7 metre strut will be levered into place for final testing and tensioning overnight on Saturday, if all goes to plan.
If we've got the strut ready and it's in manufacture at the moment and we complete all the tests and reviews that we've got to do for the rest of this week, we're hoping we'll be able to close the bridge southbound on Saturday night for an extended period to install the strut.
However, Brett Liddon says the agency still cannot put a time frame on when all 8 lanes of the bridge may reopen. The latest job numbers indicate a resilience in Auckland during the city's second lockdown. Stats NZ's employment indicators are a timely barometer of the labour market. Amy Williams reports.
August figures show the number of filled jobs in the supercity rose 5% compared with the same month last year. Economist at Sense Partners, Sharmabil Yaqub, says the sector breakdown shows there were fewer jobs in hospitality and logistics, but increases in healthcare and public administration. He says it indicates job losses have largely been contained to the sectors most affected. Ko Amy Williams, Tēnei.
Farmers in the lower South Island say the heavy snow and bitingly cold temperatures are problematic during lambing season. Snow has fallen to sea level with heavier flurries settling on higher ground. Waihola sheep farmer Robert Gervin says the unseasonably cold weather poses many challenges.
It means that you're not growing a lot of grass. It means that your stock aren't all that happy about life. It just makes things tough. You know, as I said, you're not growing grass, and if there is snow in the paddocks, they do struggle to find the grass. It does make things quite difficult, to be quite honest, yeah.
Waihola sheep farmer Robert Gervin. All South Island highways have now reopened, apart from State Highway 94 between Te Anau and Milford Sound, and State Highway 93 from Clinton to Mataura. It's 5 minutes past 6. The All Blacks coach Ian Foster has accused SANZAAR of reneging on a rugby championship deal that would have seen players home in time for Christmas. The All Blacks are in camp in Hamilton as they prepare for the Bledisloe Cup test against Australia. But New Zealand Rugby and SANZAAR remain at loggerheads over the schedule for the rugby championship in Australia. The schedule has the All Blacks playing their last test of the tournament on December 12th, meaning the players wouldn't get out of quarantine in time for Christmas. Foster says that's something they won't accept.
There was a deal, we feel that SANZAAR's reneged on that. 6 tests, 5 weeks, so there's been set expectations and they haven't been delivered on, so that's up for us to the game and SANZAAR to sort out in the next few days.
Meanwhile, the Wallabies have had their first training run in Christchurch this afternoon, but must train and live in a team bubble until the first test. The Black Caps will launch their summer of cricket with a T20 game against the West Indies at Eden Park at the end of November, before 2 test series against the Caribbean side and a further 2 against Pakistan. The opening game against the Windies is on November 27th. The first test will be in Hamilton against the Windies starting on December 3rd, while Tauranga's Bay Oval will host a Boxing Day test against Pakistan. And the Tampa Bay Lightning have won the National Hockey League's Stanley Cup with a 2-0 win over the Dallas Stars to clinch the best of 7 series 4-2. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dylan Mayhew laments the sudden death of Vaughan Jones, who possessed one of this country's finest mathematical minds, one of the world's leading thinkers on the numbers behind knots. We mark the 75th birthday of the United Nations from both a global and Kiwi perspective, and there's a window on the world of obesity and COVID-19 silver lining for the overweight. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and Central High Country. Mostly fine weather. Isolated showers with snow above 700 metres in the south today. Showers retreating to the west coast tomorrow afternoon. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, fine. However, isolated showers for the ranges tomorrow afternoon and evening. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Horowhenua through to Wellington. Mainly fine with some isolated showers. Severe westerly gales in exposed places, easing tonight. Western ranges of Nelson, also Bulla and Westland. Showers and southwesterly gales north of Hokitika with snow above 200 metres at first, gradually easing. Fine weather elsewhere. For the remainder of Nelson, also Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine. Showers about Banks Peninsula today with snow above 400 metres. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, snow showers widespread and heavy for southern Fiordland, Southland and Clutha, easing tonight and clearing by tomorrow evening. Chatham Island, showers, some heavy and possibly thundery. Snow to sea level tonight and tomorrow morning. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Serious Fraud Office has charged 2 people over its investigation into the New Zealand First Foundation. But Winston Peters says his party is in the clear. The SFO investigation began back in February after a referral from the police. It followed revelations that the foundation received donations from some of the country's wealthiest people in business, fisheries and horse racing worlds. None of the donations were declared in the party's electoral returns, and the only disclosed source of money to New Zealand First since 2017 was a loan made by the foundation. The 2 people have been charged with obtaining by deception and have interim name suppression. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says his party has been exonerated of any electoral law breaches.
Having fully investigated the allegations, the SFO has cleared the New Zealand First Party, all of its ministers, all sitting members of the New Zealand First Party, all candidates standing for election, and all party employees of any wrongdoing. It's a relief after months of this cloud hanging over the party that we have been fully cleared. Unlike the recent National Party donation scandal, no party member has been implicated or charged by the SFO. Whilst the SFO has confirmed that no New Zealand First Minister, parliamentarian or party member broke any electoral laws, the timing of its decision to lay charges against the foundation constitutes a James Comey-level error of judgment. It's an appalling intrusion in a period when the people begin to think seriously about the shape of the next government.
Well, depending on what shape the next government takes, Winston Peters' current job as Deputy Prime Minister may be up for grabs. Current polling puts New Zealand First on around 1%, well below the 5% needed to get them back into Parliament. That could see the Greens or ACT vying for the Deputy Prime Minister position, a scenario that neither Labour nor National are ruling out. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, will join me in the studio shortly, but first, his report.
Oh, Winston! How are you? Good luck, I hope you win.
You never know who you'll bump into on the campaign trail. Today it was a former schoolmate Winston Peters encountered at Motueka Mall.
I left there before from Guidas High School.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I remember you being there, though.
Yeah. Thanks.
What was Winston Peters like at high school?
Oh, I can't tell you that.
But Mr Peters' days of meeting and greeting may soon be approaching an end. The latest polls have New Zealand First well out of reach of Parliament, wallowing on just 1% last night.
I think what you've got to do is start stacking up the integrity of the polls that you're relying upon. And you can't.
But if the polls are right, come October 18, there could be a vacancy in the Deputy PM's office. And already there's talk of who might fill that seat.
That role, like all of the other ministerial positions, is something that we'll discuss after the election.
James Shaw could have a shot at the role. The TVNZ Colmar Brunton poll put the Greens in the Queenmaker position. Labour would need their help to govern. And that means Shaw, or Marama Davidson, would have the leverage to claim that number 2 job.
It's not out of the realm of possibility, but we look at that portfolio like we look at any other ministerial portfolio on its merits.
These are just not negotiations that I would ever enter into before we've even had election day.
But note that Jacinda Ardern's not ruling it out. Instant fodder for her opponent, Judith Collins, who tweeted, "Imagine co-deputy PMs Marama Davidson and James Shaw."
Yeah, I think it's a pretty scary outlook for people.
But Ms Collins may have to negotiate that position too. National's path to government would require a jump in support, but also the help of ACT, which could mean Deputy Prime Minister David Seymour.
Never say never.
I'm not ruling it out. It's a negotiation still to be had. I'm not in that lucky position yet to do that.
This is not a comedy show.
Both ACT and the Greens say policy is far more important to them than ministerial positions.
It depends on the extent to which we think it can help us to advance the program of work that we have.
I personally turned down the baubles in order to get end-of-life choice done.
Labour, of course, would prefer not to negotiate at all. In that spot, if Labour could govern alone, Jacinda Ardern says the job would belong to Kelvin Davis.
He is our deputy leader of the Labour Party, so by virtue of that, that's how it operates.
A lot to play for, with less than 3 weeks till voting day. From Auckland for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
And our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, is with me live in the studio now. You've just been down at that press conference with Winston Peters. I mean, how would you describe his mood?
I think you can say that was vintage Winston Peters, behind the podium, addressing the camera, looking straight down the barrel and claiming two things simultaneously at once. Firstly, that this completely exonerates him. They're in the clear, him and the party. While at the same time, the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, has completely and utterly abused its powers here, so much so that he's going to court.
So he is questioning the nature of the investigation that at the same time he says exonerated him. The foundations of that investigation, excuse the pun there.
Yeah, I mean, the Serious Fraud Office statement is pretty clear. It says no minister, no MP, no candidate, and no current party member has been charged. That is what Winston Peters is claiming as vindication here, as exoneration. It's worth pointing out nothing in there about previous party members or anyone else for that matter. The fact remains, two people have been charged here. Two people have been charged with obtaining by deception, two people related to the case, and that means vindication is pretty hard to declare. I mean, we cannot speculate as to who those people are because of the interim name suppression in place, but charges have been laid. This will go to the district court. It could yet be moved to the High Court. That's what happened with the legal case with Jamie Lee Ross, of course, the three other men. It's what often happens with these high-profile cases. So this story certainly does not end here.
In terms of his vindication, he's also raised concerns, his claim of vindication. He's raised concerns about the timing of this announcement with overseas voting and early voting. We're on the cusp of it, right? So people have to make their decision now. And he says in his press statement that he is concerned that people, voters, will be unable to make the distinction between New Zealand First, the foundation, and New Zealand First, the party. Is this saga having an effect on his polling popularity?
I think it is fair to say that Winston Peters is laying the groundwork here to question the validity of the election results. The New Zealand First is low on the polls, and they have been low on the polls for a long time. They have not once cracked that 5% threshold during the past term of government. The past few polls, though, have had them quite low, around 1% or 2%. He was asked specifically whether he will point to this on October 18 as a way of questioning that, and he would not go there today. But the illusions, you talked about them, they certainly point that way. References to James Comey, to Hillary Clinton, the United States. By the time that she was cleared, it was too late, he said, and he seems to be saying the same thing here. I guess we just have to wait and see, first of all, how voters vote on election day, and then how he responds the day after.
So in terms of a little bit of the backstory, obviously he is drawing a very clear line of distinction between the foundation and the party, but refresh our memories. Are the common characters here? What's the relationship between the two?
Yes, Mr. Peters again today stressing that the foundation is separate, completely separate from the party, not really wanting to go into any details about that, citing sub judice say. Winston Peters clearly very concerned about people making that link, stressing that it's up to the media to really point that out because he does not want the public to be confused about that. The New Zealand First Foundation, no link whatsoever supposedly to the New Zealand First Party, despite the name being rather similar. A lot of characters related there too. People connected to Mr. Peters, connected to the party. So yeah, there is definitely still questions there. It's not as clear cut, although it is a completely different entity from the party. I guess there are going to be questions there from members of the public still, even if Mr. Peters doesn't want that to be the case.
Yeah, and I would point people to our long-form reporting. Guy Nesbitt has done a lot on this, and there is a number of articles that people should bone up on if they're interested in the detail. Also pointing out that Winston Peters was at a meeting that established the foundation, so he was very present in the machinations and the formation of that foundation.
Right when it was being set up.
Yeah, right when it was being set up. Talk to us about this legal action then, because, you know, this is, well, he loves a good court case. So what is he saying he's doing here?
Yeah, Mr. Peters is seeking a declaration that the Serious Fraud Office abused its statutory powers, that it acted unreasonably and without justification. Now, he says his lawyers will issue proceedings in the High Court. That is how upset he is. He is going to the High Court. I asked him, actually, whether he would have wanted the Serious Fraud Office to have sat on this information, whether till after the election. Is that really what he was asking, what he would have expected them to do? And he wouldn't go there. He didn't say that, but he said that his problem with what the Serious Fraud Office has done here is it comes down to its treatment of his case, of this case. He says that they treated this case differently from others. The two cases he points to are the Serious Fraud Office inquiry right now into donations to the Labour Party, also an investigation into election expenses connected to the Auckland and Christchurch mayoralty races there. He also claims that the Serious Fraud Office has more information relating to money which is going on into the National Party. That previous inquiry relating to Jamie Lee Ross, he says apparently they have not acted on it. So yes, Mr. Peters crying foul. Andrew Guidas said it before, the best defence is a form of attack. Mr. Peters back in High Court or on his way there anyway.
Did he say who his lawyer was going to be in that action?
No word on that yet.
Okay. And do we know what he's up to tomorrow? Because, in terms of, as you say, best form of defence is attack, no doubt this will not be over in terms of being a campaign tool for him.
Yes, I don't have in front of me his itinerary. I do not know whereabouts Winston Peters is going to be. He was out earlier this morning walking around Manukau Mall, talking to members of the public. His campaign to date has been rather lacklustre. He's struggled particularly with the restraints of COVID-19, the restrictions around that. He prefers to be in the town hall type environment, addressing large crowds, and has really struggled with not being able to do that and having to instead sort of
adapt his style.
Correct, and interacting with the public on a more one-on-one basis. So as we move down through those restriction levels, perhaps we'll see Mr. Peters return to form. It remains to be seen how this development today affects his campaign.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be hearing more from him. Thanks, Craig. That's Craig McCulloch, our Deputy Political Editor, who was at that press conference with Winston Peters. It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. 40 years as an intellectually disabled patient in care, and the treatment received has been outlined to the Abuse in Care Royal Commission inquiry. Paul Beale, who is 69, was first admitted as a patient at the Kimberley Centre near Levin at the age of 10 and spent 44 years there. He functions at a very basic intellectual level. Our reporter Andrew McRae has been at the hearing today.
Paul Beale has no awareness of physical danger and can't make decisions for himself. His sister Gay Rowe is his guardian and gave evidence on his behalf to the Commission. She says her brother started out as an unmarked young boy, but he's been left with many scars from his time at the Kimberley Centre.
It was just awful because we don't know how he got them, whether they were fights with other young people in the ward with him, or whether it was something that was done in restraining him for some reason.
Gay Rose says her brother was given drugs that made him like a zombie. She describes his antipsychotic medications as horrendous.
And he was taking 8 at breakfast time, 6 at lunchtime, and 8 at dinner time. And when I saw this cocktail of drugs, that was just one of many he was taking.
She recalled visiting her brother one day at the centre and seeing another young man sitting bound by his wrists and ankles to an armchair, and the attendants telling her it was to stop him from running away.
It was one of those things that I thought, dear God, if they are doing that to him, are they doing that to my brother? And how many other people here do they do that to?
After Kimberley was closed down, Paul Beale was moved to a residential home called Parklands. He spent 7 years there. Gay Rose says Paul received a number of unexplained injuries after being regularly assaulted by other residents. She later found out the Ministry of Health had concerns about Parklands, but still sent her brother there. Her lawyer Sonia Cooper questioned her about an audit report on the home.
I did not see an audit.
And if you had known about the Ministry of Health's concerns about Parklands, what would have been your decision about Paul going there?
He absolutely would not have gone there.
Gay Rowe took a claim against the Ministry of Health for Paul's treatment at Kimberley. After a long drawn-out process, she settled on Paul's behalf in 2017.
It's just that Paul has no understanding, and if I was not here to speak up for him, nothing would have happened. And for having spent so much time in Kimberley and then 7 years at Parklands, he's owed the world, basically, from the way he's been treated.
She felt throughout the claim process the Ministry of Health was stalling, hoping she'd go away.
My brother is only one of hundreds, possibly thousands, throughout this country who have been on the receiving end of abuse by those who have been charged with their care.
Gay Rowe thought a first apology letter from the ministry Paul received was not worth the paper it was printed on, and a second one was only slightly better. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tene.
There have been plenty of warnings about the acute mental health crisis already unfolding during the pandemic. In Australia, Women's Health Services say demand for psychological support is soaring, with anxiety, family violence and thoughts of self-harm increasing. With services stretched, it's feared people aren't getting the help they need. And this is the ABC's Sarah Sedgie.
At the Illawarra Women's Health Centre south of Sydney, there's a growing list of women seeking mental health help, and it's weighing heavily on Sally Stevenson, who's the centre's general manager.
No, we're not able to meet the demand. It is overwhelming. It's gone up 25%, and we were already at capacity before COVID started. So what we've seen in terms of our wait list is it's blown out from 2 to 3 weeks to now 3 months. We can't get any woman in for counselling before Christmas.
The service caters for women living in Wollongong and Harbour, and Sally Stevenson says they're grappling with a range of issues.
Primarily anxiety, panic, depression, stress and domestic violence, but also a very worrying increase in suicidality.
And she's worried that the mental health pressures will only increase.
There's a number of reasons why this will continue to be a problem and continue most likely to increase as a problem, particularly with the financial stress that we know is coming for many years. And in regional and remote areas, of course, it's further exacerbated by issues around employment and access and availability of services. The further out from the metropolitan areas you go, the less available and the less number of resources you have to access support.
In Melbourne, Professor Jayshree Kulkarni is also grappling with a soaring number of women seeking support. She's the director of the Alfred Hospital's Women's Mental Health Clinic.
I just cannot describe the huge numbers of increase in referrals from general practitioners and from other practitioners as well. But I'd say normally I'd receive 5 to 8 new referral requests every week. And in the last 12 days, I've now had 400 referrals.
She says while older women are suffering because they've been cut off from family and social networks, younger women are worried about what their future will look like.
We have young women who are experiencing a range of panic, eating disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, with a sense of being locked in, with a sense of being cut off, and deliberate self-harm as a result of anger that's expressed inwards or on themselves rather than externally being able to cope with it, who have fears of not achieving career goals in schooling or getting a job, and looking very bleak about their future prospects.
And Professor Kulkarni is concerned women can't get the help they need.
And I actually don't think that there are specifically tailored women's mental health services other than in the perinatal or related to childbirth. And even there, it's not great. You know, somehow women's mental health has managed not to have a profile on its own. So there are very few specific clinics that deal with women's mental health. So we were already somewhat struggling to keep up with demand before this. And of course now it just is quite an impossible demand to keep up with unless there's a serious focus and attention paid to half the population.
And that report by the ABC's Sarah Sedgey. Let's get to some of your feedback before we head off. This is on the SFO charging two people in relation to New Zealand First Foundation electoral funding, and none of the people charged are MPs, ministers or party members of New Zealand First, just for clarity. Gary says now is the time to seriously consider moving to state funding for political parties. Jeanette has got in touch to say, I think it's hilarious that Winnie has been exonerated. I'm not a New Zealand First supporter, but SFO should have known that he knew the legalities. Winston always bounces back, and are we really to believe that Collins did not expect or know the outcome before announcing her new policy, re the SFO? Another listener says the Serious Fraud Office does not need funding. It needs to be investigated and reformed. John in Southland, well, John says, can't wait to see the back of bellicose bullying arrogant Peters and his party. And Dennis is wondering, if Winston Peters has no connection with the foundation, why is he going to bat for them with a lawsuit? And Sue from Littleton is wondering where the money is coming from for that legal action. Whose money will Mr Peters use to sue the Serious Fraud Squad, says Sue. Let's move on to fruit picking now, and this is about, some growers wanting to bring in fruit pickers from the Pacific Islands. This person says the growers should offer fruit pickers more attractive wages and they will turn up. Remember the free market economy and market forces. Another listener reckons bring out a baby boomer army to pick fruit. Many have their own accommodation on wheels and others can use tourism's empty camper vans. Boomers will be keen to get together under the trees and help the country. This sounds like a kind of cute idea. Vicky says on euthanasia that she finds this coercion business really annoying. I am well over 80 and I think if these families are so dysfunctional that they would coerce their elders, why should I not have the right to ask to die? What about my rights, says Vicky. On the bridge, Terry from Auckland thinks that they should turn away high-sided vehicles on the bridge if the winds get too high, rather than shutting up shop to everyone. He reckons that's a very poor decision and inconveniencing other people. We will be back tomorrow.
30. New Zealand First will take legal action against the Serious Fraud Office, which has charged two people following its investigation of the New Zealand First Foundation. The people charged are not New Zealand First ministers, sitting members, candidates, current members or party employees. 3 German yachties whose exemption to enter the country was rejected have been jailed after arriving in the Bay of Islands. And 3 people have died in wildfires in Northern California, which have quadrupled in size in a day after being fanned by strong winds. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The Ministry of Health sent an email to everyone who had previously registered for a QR code, reminding them that they need to display it, so there really is no excuse now.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night